Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Look, if you're a focused learner gearing up for a mechanics and design exam that's rapidly approaching, you are exactly where you need to be. Grab your notebook, get comfortable, and let's just tune out all those distractions. Today, we're going to take the totally complex world of machines and break it down into a super clean, highly visual crash course. We are literally taking that dense textbook theory and turning it into an absolute powerhouse of an efficient study tool to help you completely ace this test.
So here's our game plan for today's Explainer. Think of this as your ultimate syllabus. We'll be covering the power of pulleys, gear systems explained, calculating velocity ratio, mechanical control, and finally evaluating machine design. Let's get right to it.
Section 1, the power of pulleys. Time to defeat gravity. All right, so gravity is constantly pulling down on us with a force of about 10 newtons per kilogram. That means heavy loads are, well, they're incredibly tough for us humans to lift on our own. But hey, that's exactly why machines exist, right? To help us work smarter, faster, and way more efficiently against forces like gravity. Now, exam questions almost always kick off with definitions. So a pulley, it's basically just a grooved wheel with a rope, chain, or belt sitting right in that groove, and it's used specifically for lifting. Definitely lock that into your memory. And when we need an even bigger mechanical advantage, we step it up to a compound pulley. This is just an awesome, powerful combination of fixed and movable pulleys working together. Now listen up, because examiners absolutely love throwing multiple choice and column matching questions at you about these three classes. First up, the fixed pulley. It's attached to a support right above the load. It doesn't actually multiply your force, it simply reverses the direction of your pull, making it a bit more convenient. Then we have the movable pulley, which, you guessed it, is physically attached right to the moving load itself. And finally, the compound pulley. This bad boy mixes both types to give you a massive mechanical advantage. Okay, so how does a compound system actually generate this mechanical advantage? If you're hit with a level 2 or level 3 question asking you to break down the mechanics, use these exact steps. Step 1, you anchor the rope to a high stable point. Step 2, you run that rope down and pass it through the movable pulley that's attached directly to your load. And step 3, this is where the real physics magic happens. The weight of the load is now spread across the multiple supporting lengths of rope. We actually call these rope lengths falls. Simply put, the more falls you've got, the easier it is to lift the load. Moving right along to section 2, gear systems explained. Let's talk rotational mechanics. Now, before we even start looking at the physical gears themselves, you absolutely have to nail down these two foundational terms. Seriously, do not mix these up on test day or your math is going to totally fall apart later. The driver gear is your input. It's the gear physically connected to the power source that actually initiates the movement. On the flip side, the driven gear, which you'll also hear called the pinion, is your output. This is the gear that's actively being moved by the driver. Just remember, input causes output, driver moves driven. All right, knowing exactly when and why to use each of these 4 gear types is practically a guaranteed exam question. First, spur gears. These operate perfectly in line with teeth around the edge, and they counter-rotate, meaning they spin in opposite directions to alter speed or direction. Next, bevel or crown gears. Their teeth stick out at 90-degree angles, making them absolutely perfect for transmitting force right around corners. Then we've got the rack and pinion setup. This takes a normal circular gear and runs it flat along a toothed bar, which is a brilliant way to turn rotational movement into straight, linear motion. And finally, the worm gear. This features a screw-like shaft that meshes with a standard gear. The result? A massive reduction in speed, but an incredibly high turning force or torque. That brings us to section 3, calculating velocity ratio. Don't worry, the math of mechanics really isn't as scary as it sounds. Okay, here is the absolute most crucial point. You have to commit this one single formula to memory. Velocity ratio equals the number of teeth on the driven gear divided by the number of teeth on the driver gear. Literally, write this at the very top of your test paper the second you sit down. Remember, the driven gear, your output, always goes on top. When you get hit with one of those multi-level calculation questions, just take a breath. Don't rush it. Tackle it systematically using these 3 steps. Step 1. Identify the driver gear first. Ask yourself, where is the power actually coming from? Step 2. Carefully count the teeth on both. Let's imagine a scenario where the driven gear has 12 teeth and the driver has 24. Step 3. Plug those numbers straight into your formula and divide to find your ratio. Boom, done. Now, before we actually solve that exact problem, you've got to know how to explain your answer. Your syllabus uses very specific terminology for these outcomes. According to your textbooks, if the driven gear is larger, it turns more slowly than the driver but produces a much greater turning force, or torque. Your text specifically refers to this state as gearing up. On the flip side, if the driven gear is smaller, it turns faster than the driver, but transmits way less force. Your text calls this gearing down. Make sure you memorize these exact, specific textbook definitions. All right, let's put this into practice and test your active recall. Consider this a simulated exam question. Pop quiz. If the driven gear has 12 teeth and the driver gear has 24 teeth, what is the velocity ratio? Take a second. Visualize that formula in your head. Remember, driven gear on top. And the answer is 1:2. 12 divided by 24 simplifies perfectly to 1/2. And this actually brilliantly illustrates what your textbook defines as gearing down. Because the driven gear is smaller, it's turning exactly twice for every single rotation of the larger driver gear. So you're gaining speed, but you are transmitting less force. Moving into Section 4, Mechanical Control. Now, while this broader category includes things like bicycle brakes and disc brakes for friction control and ratchet and pulse systems to restrict movement to just one direction, our primary visual focus for today is going to be specifically on cam cleats. So, what is a cam cleat? It's a wonderfully elegant mechanical control system. By definition, it's designed to securely hold ropes or lines in position. Notice the really key difference here compared to our previous topics. A cam cleat isn't generating or multiplying force like a compound pulley or a gear train would. Instead, its entire job is controlling that force. Level 2 exam questions frequently ask you to bridge the gap between theory and reality by asking for specific use case examples. For cam cleats, you really should memorize these 3 real-world applications: securing sails on boats, holding heavy lifted loads perfectly steady, and managing the delicate tension inside complex pulley systems. Listing these out will prove to the examiner that you truly understand the mechanism's application. Oh, and real quick, if you are asked about the other controls on your exam, just remember that bicycle brakes use levers to apply friction to a wheel rim to stop you, disc brakes apply heavy friction to a central rotor for heavier vehicles, and a ratchet and pawl is used in winches to let a gear turn freely in just one direction while absolutely preventing it from slipping backward. And finally, Section 5, Evaluating Machine Design. Time to look at human interaction. Okay, I'm just going to say it. This table right here is pure gold for your exam prep. Seriously, take a screenshot of this immediately. These 3 design principles get confused by students all the time. First, aesthetics. This is purely about visual appeal: the colors, the textures, the overall styling of the machine. Next is anthropometrics, which is strictly data-driven. It is the study of average human body measurements to determine things like ideal handle heights, seat depths, or lever angles. And lastly, ergonomics. Ergonomics takes all that raw anthropometric data and applies it to design for efficient, safe human interaction. The main goal here: preventing injury and improving usability. All right, the absolute most crucial point here is knowing how to actually deploy these definitions to crush those complex, multi-level evaluation questions. You're definitely going to see exam questions broken down into columns or categorized from level 1 up to level 3 difficulty. So here's your battle plan. Step 1. For those foundational level 1 questions, identify the intended user using anthropometrics and state the core function. Step 2. For level 2, you step up your game by evaluating the materials used and assessing cost effectiveness. And step 3. For those really tough level 3 questions, you need to critically assess the machine's safety using ergonomics and its visual appeal using aesthetics. If you structure your answers exactly like this, satisfying every single column of the rubric, you'll be well on your way to a perfect score. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final kind of deep thought to ponder while you review your notes later. Consider everything we've looked at today, from mechanical advantage right through to ergonomics, and ask yourself this: do the machines we build overcome our physical limitations, or do our human limitations perfectly dictate the shape of our machines? It's a pretty fascinating lens through which to view technology, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep studying hard, trust in your structure, and best of absolute luck on your exam. You've got this.